I'm Elle Palmer, and I will be the moderator for this panel on writing and editing software. I write fairy tale retellings that are fun and warm and fuzzy. Here's a sample of one. Wow! We have three great panelists here that are going to help us talk through the different editing software out there. Can you just tell us who you are and a little bit of your background? We'll start with John.
Okay, I'm John M. Olsen. I have a fantasy trilogy out, Ryland Throne series. I've also got something around 35 or so short stories out in various genres. And I am a Scrivener and Word user primarily, and so that's going to be kind of the area of my focus for this panel. Okay, who's up next?
Let's do Christopher.
Hi. Yeah, hi, my name is Christopher Husberg. I write dark epic fantasy. My first book, Duskfall, came out in 2016, and the last book in that series, The Chaos Queen Quintet, was supposed to come out last year, but has been delayed due to COVID. So that's coming out in April of this year. Not my fault, actually. It really is being delayed because of COVID. It was done last year. But yeah, so the last book in my quintet is coming out, which is exciting. And I primarily, I use Scrivener by choice. I use Word by force, because that's what my editors use. I also dabble in several other different writing programs, anything, things like Writer Duet, Final Draft, some screenwriting software. And I use Apple Pages as well for some things, so Google Docs. So that's kind of mostly where I'm writing.
And we'd ask Chris about himself, but he just disappeared. I'm sure he'll be back.
You got intimidated by yeah. John and I intimidated him off the.
Yeah, we're scary like that.
Yeah, oh man.
That makes sense. Well, speaking of intimidating, which software do you think has the highest learning curve? Or let's start with a very basic question. Which softwares are out there?
I think just from the title of the panel, we've got several good contenders there with Scrivener and Word and Google Docs. There's also Open Office that wasn't mentioned initially, but those are kind of the big contenders. Christopher had also mentioned a few other tools that he's familiar with. There's an awful lot of stuff out there to use.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick Google search, and you'll come across dozens of different writing softwares, editing software. So there's a lot out there, and a lot that's worth trying, and some of it you have to pay, to use. And I'll take a minute here, and let's let Chris introduce himself.
Sorry, people. Over the button I'm not supposed to press now. I'll tell you. So my name's Chris Jones. My fiction name is Christopher J. H. Jones. I have a novel series out, a set of historical mystery novels called the Trinity Flynn series. I also write fairy tales, only they're originals. 12 Upon a Time is the most famous one of those batches. I've got short stories all over the place. I ghostwrite and publish short story collections. I also run a publishing house, and so I've seen every kind of software that there is. I primarily use for ghostwriting Google Docs, so that's because of its collaborative nature. I do use Scrivener for longer novel type things, but most of my short stories are either Word or Google Docs, and I have written in Ulysses, which was, I think, part of the original sort of panel thing. We were going to talk at least a little bit about Ulysses. But I've also used other kinds of things. I've never used any script writing software, so I'm kind of interested in Christopher's experience with that and what he knows about that. But I'm excited to be with the group and hope we got some good stuff to say.
So do any of you have a software that you use for all stages of writing, or do you use a mix? So we're talking for all stages of writing, I'm talking about plotting, brainstorming, drafting, editing, and then possibly publishing. But that kind of gets into other things depending on how you're publishing and who's publishing.
Yeah, that's one of those things that it really depends on who you're working with. But quite often, as soon as you start working with another person, Scrivener goes out the window and you have to export into Word, for instance, and then use that exclusively from there forward. And so there's this transition point that you hit at some point in the process. And so, yeah, Scrivener, it's got a lot of really great things for that front end of the process. But at the back end, I think Word is kind of the standard that a lot of people go with. But it's nice that you can also get in there with Google Docs and things like that that Chris was mentioning.
Yeah, for me, what I find to be the barrier in Scrivener is track changes. There's not a track changes function. There's a very general editing function where you can with use different color font based different color typeset and differentiate anything new you add with different colors, but it doesn't show specific changes like things that were deleted and what was put in the place in whatever you deleted in that place. And so when I'm working with an editor, they always really want to see the changes that we're tracking for the later drafts of a book, and so Scrivener usually, like John mentioned, just goes out the window because there's a barrier that we really can't cross at this point. And from what I understand about the Scrivener software, it's not likely that we'll get a full track changes function in that software. So that's that's going to be the case for a while. So if it bothers you to be switching, Microsoft Word, frankly, is probably your best bet. But if you're looking for something with more features, then there's a lot out there that you can use for different steps of the process, and then kind of converge, usually on something more mainstream like Microsoft Word or Google Docs.
Yeah, I echo that. I would say, as far as Scrivener goes, I've never found any writing software of any kind that is as powerful for the pre-stage. I don't plot. I just write. So I could use Notepad, for crying out loud, but I use Scrivener to keep track of the hair color of my protagonist. I use it to keep track of all the links to the abandoned underground stations in 1920 New York. I use it for, I pile all of that stuff in there. I also write, I ghostwrite a series of choose your own adventure novels. And I'll be honest, except for Google Docs being able to link to the chapter heading. So at the end where it says, if you choose this, go here. If you choose that, go there. Google Docs will do that with a hyperlink. But Scrivener will show me the entire novel color-coded so that I can follow the threads all the way through and see which ones are longer, which ones are shorter, where are my kill threads where you get in there and there's no way out except you die, which is, if you've never tried this, it's incredibly fun to just dead end everything. There's no way out except killing everybody. It's frustrating for the readers, but for an author, it's amazing. And then... But Scrivener does that better than any software that I've seen. But once I get to, and I'm handing this off to another editorial team, I mostly on the front end, I have to export it and then transfer it to a collaborative format, either Word or more and more often now Google Docs for the end. But there is nothing in any other software that I've found that matches what Scrivener can do in terms of keeping your whole world universe in an online, in your electronic environment. And even though Windows has kind of not been a priority for L&L, and the Mac, what they're doing with the Mac is superior, it's still supported, like the software still functions. And I do rely on that a great deal, depending on the complexity of the work that I'm involved in.
Yeah, if I could just riff a little bit on the whole Scrivener thing, since we're on the topic, and obviously this is not a Scrivener panel, and there's lots to discuss here. But let me just, because I am a pretty heavy Scrivener user, which is to say that I think I use a fair amount of the features that it offers, and Scrivener offers a lot of features. And the good thing about Scrivener is that you don't have to use all the features to feel like you're, taking advantage of the program. You do have to pay for Scrivener. It's a one-time fee, sort of, meaning you kind of pay a fee up front, and then usually if a significant upgrade happens in the future, you'll usually have to repurchase the program. But there's not a subscription or anything like that. And a lot of times you can find things like student discounts and that sort of thing. But it does have a really steep, like, there are so many features that it is intimidating for a lot of people, and almost a distraction, frankly, for some writers. Some writers see all the features and they either say, oh, that's too much for me, I don't want to bother, or they get so invested. It's kind of like world builder's disease, if you've heard of that, right? Where they get so invested in all of the features that Scrivener has that suddenly they're just dinking around in the software and they're not writing a novel, right? Which is a problem if your goal is to write a novel. So there are, there's pitfalls and issues with Scrivener, but I do really love the features. Chris mentioned a few of them. For me, what I really have started to take advantage of is what was called the metadata in Scrivener, where you can create your own metadata for each chapter, for each scene. And this can be anything from, keeping track of what version of the draft it is, to how many characters are in each scene, who are mentioned by name, what locations are, where each scene takes place. For me, I keep track of, like, the emotional valence of the scene. So, like, is there an emotional change, and where's the turning point in the scene? So anyway, all of this stuff I can keep track of if I want to. I don't do this for every project because it can be a rabbit hole, and I can just suddenly, again, find myself lost in all the information available. But it can be very helpful for me, especially in the revision process, like the first and second revision, to compile all this data and look at my manuscript from this really high up bird's eye view, and yet also have access to all of these really intricate details. It's very helpful for me later in the process. So I do really like it, but it's definitely not for everybody.
No.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a gearhead feel to it, where it can be overwhelming for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a panelist, but I'll just make a note. I use Word with Excel on the side to do a lot of what Scrivener does. So I do a lot of it manually. Mm-hmm. So you can do it that way, but Scrivener has that availability of combining all of that into one space. So I'm going to walk through kind of different stages of writing and what software works best for that, or what are a couple options that are good for that. So first of all, for plotting and outlining, like the pre-writing stages of your novel.
I think we've kind of gone over some of that for Scrivener already, just because it has all these ancillary documents that you can put in there and link to and store all that information. But I think it goes back to what you were just talking about with Excel. That's also a wonderful resource for just storing lists of data, links, whatever it is. Sometimes I'll just set up a secondary document to keep notes in. If it's not going to be a really big, complicated project, sometimes that's enough. So I'll just have two documents. One is the story and one is the notes on the story. So just when I'm starting out and doing that basic outline, that might be plenty for me. There are actually some more complex plotting tools, but I have never put the time in to learn about those tools to the level where they become really useful to me. And so I'm still stuck in the old school methods of pulling up these other, whether it's just organizing the individual notes, even just using some of the journaling software, there's something there. And I've got friends that go old school and just have paper notebooks, and they'll just do their first pass writing things out longhand. So there are a lot of different options there. And the really cool thing about it is you can't really say that any particular one of those options is going to be right or wrong. It's just find the one that's going to work best for you. Some people that I know are just absolute fans of fountain pens, and they just love the feel of writing with a fountain pen. And that really helps them with their process.
Yep. Yeah, there's something I'm a little bit that type where I use Blackwing pencils and notebooks. They're just really nice pencils. Hey, yeah, fountain pen. There you go.
I think we all have our fancy pens.
Yeah, right. And there's for me there's something different and sort of it makes my brain work differently to write something up physically. So I do appreciate that. And I have used a little bit to go back to some of the plotting softwares you mentioned, John. One's usually on display at LTUE when we're there physically. I think it's called Plotter or something.
Oh yeah.
So there's Plotter. There's Scrivener actually has a secondary app called Scapple. I don't actually even know if they support it anymore. I don't know how successful it was. I used it briefly, but which is basically just a giant chalkboard or whiteboard that you can goof around on. But it also depends on how okay you are with spreading your process across multiple mediums, right? Are you okay with having, because for me sometimes I get my brain goes a little bit crazy when I know I have a bunch of notes in my notebook and a bunch of notes in like my plotting app or whatever, and then my same thing in in Scrivener, and that's sometimes that's annoying to me, but which is what Scrivener, for me, I can do a lot of that within Scrivener, so I've started to do that. But yeah, I mean, ultimately though, Excel or even just Word itself, you can do some really fantastic, plotting, outlining, pre-writing stuff in those apps.
Some people just use a big pile of sticky notes and a patch of wall, and that's how they do their initial pass.
Whiteboard. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Chris looks like he has lots of passion on this topic.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, but my number one passion on this thing is we sort of just did a drive-by shooting of it a minute ago, but let's bring that out here and sit it on the desk where it can stink up the room. If what you're using to get ready to write stops you from writing, dump it.
Yeah.
Whatever, it doesn't matter what you paid for it. It doesn't matter how long your contract is with the stupid thing. If it stops you from writing, get rid of it. Because the important thing is to write, to put the words on the page, to build the story, not the world the story happens in, but the story. And if your complex writing software, or I got the chat over here on one of these screens, and it's exploding with people who have this 17-part process for all the different things. That's great, okay? If that means that you're actually writing, cool. But if what that means is that you're excited about basically plugging computers into your head and having 50 screens going on at once with all this incredible world building you're doing, and all it is doing is happening in your head, you're not a writer. You might be a creator, and that's great. Like, I have no problem with that. I don't build houses. I don't do sprinkler systems. I teach and I write. I don't build complex systems for figuring out how to write. I put my fingers on the keyboard and I type. And any system that we're talking about will allow you to do that. If it's stopping you from doing that, if it's too complex a process, dump it. Put the words on the page and finish the document. That's what makes you a writer. Creators are amazing, and I love you. Artists are fantastic, and I don't understand you, but you're amazing, and keep doing your stuff. But if you want to, the difference between an author and a writer is the authors finish stuff. And remember, Lord of the Rings was written out longhand. Okay, a lot of the greatest literature ever in humankind was written before there were computers. They were typed out. Okay, Isaac Asimov wrote 17 million words, published words on a typewriter. He didn't have any of the tools that we're talking about. So if they get in the way, dump them. Do something simple if that's what you need, so that you can get to the story and make the story happen.
Yeah, I think there's some wonderful software out there, and I think Chris has a good point of, if it's taking you too long to play with all the bells and whistles and the gadgets, is this helping me get to where I can finish my book?
If it's
ultimately, your software should be a tool to write your novel, right? Yeah. So if it's helping you, if it's doing its job, if it's being helpful, and it's facilitating your process, then it's great. It's a helpful tool. If it's not, you're not going to keep. You can keep it in the back of your mind. Maybe one day you might use your random plotting software or something if you don't use it. But yeah, there's no Chris is absolutely right. If it's not helping you write your novel, it's not helping you write your novel. So.
Yeah, that's the thing about tools is you have to set your goals first and then find the tools that get you to that goal the fastest. There may be some learning curve that you have to go through, some things that you need to figure out along the way. For instance, when I learned how to use styles in Word, the whole world suddenly was a new and impressive place, full of wonder and elves running around. So
if you're going to learn one thing in Word, learn to use styles, because you can use that for organizing your novel. You can use that for formatting your novel. It is
the total game changer.
Really
it gives Word so much more, dimension.
Yeah, but it's that idea of finding those, not just the tools, but the little facets of the tools that make it work better for you. And that's what you should be looking for the most in all of these. So as we're going through all these different tools, what is it that you struggle with? What is it that you find difficult? And how can an individual tool help with your individual problem? So that's one of the cool aspects of this, is there's so many different ways to approach it.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but another aspect of it is collaboration. That's both if you have co-authors and if you're working with an editor or your ghostwriter turning in a project. What are the best softwares for that stage?
I think that's one that Chris already mentioned. Google Docs wins hands down for collaboration, doesn't it?
For me, yeah. I mean, we often in the things that we're doing, there's 5 or 6 people working on the document at the same time. Nothing handles that even close to Google Docs. But I will say, and this actually was brought up in the chat, I didn't think of it until I can't remember who it was in the chat that brought this up. Remember that among all the software platforms that we're talking about here, you own everything you put into Scrivener. You own everything you put into Word because it's resident on your machine. If you do it in Google Docs, and one day Google decides that their model becomes be evil instead of don't be evil, there is the theoretical chance that all that stuff can vanish. I personally think the odds of that are very low, but you do have to admit that the odds exist. And Google's functionality, maybe you were just talking about, John was talking about setting up your system the way you like it. With Google Docs, you don't have control over what that system looks like tomorrow morning. Google comes out with an update that erases a whole bunch of the fun stuff that you used to do, and now it doesn't do that anymore. You have no recourse. There's no way of there's no pre-versioning it, like what's there, that's what you got. Whereas with some of these other things, you would be able to defend yourself against a software update until you could, back it up however you wanted to do. Because inevitably a software update just gets rid of all the stuff you like and adds a whole bunch of stuff you're not going to use. That's what updates, I think, are for. So that is one thing to pay attention to. As powerful as Google Docs is, and I love it and couldn't do without it for some of the projects that I'm working on, especially the conversation chains that you can have attached to a particular piece of the work. Nothing does that. Like even in Word, it's so clunky for that kind of collaboration. GDocs is so much better. And yet there is that little thing that everything that goes in there belongs to someone else by terms of user agreement, which is not necessarily the same thing with some others. It's just something to be aware of, be a little bit careful about.
Yeah, there is one problem that I have run into that people ought to be aware of, though, and that's that sometimes these tools hate each other. Like, have you ever tried to put a Scrivener project on Google Docs? You end up getting all of these weird conflicting files where it'll save 43 different versions of the same file because you tried to save it in too rapid a succession. And so you have to understand the differences there for what does work well with other tools. And so you have to identify, oh, this one doesn't play well with that one, so let's make sure we're only using one at a time.
I will say I have co-written a novel using Scrivener, and it's possible. But the amount of work that it took to sync up, because the problem with Scrivener is you have compatibility issues, right? If I'm using a Mac and my writing partner is using a PC, you've got a huge barrier there already. There are if you're using the same file in Dropbox, only one of you can access the file at a time, so you can't both be working on the file at the same time. Or you could make copy. You know, it becomes very redundant and not helpful. So it is possible. I wouldn't recommend it unless you really know what you're doing with Scrivener and are really devoted to the program. So I mentioned Writer Duet earlier, and I'll mention that again here because the Writer Duet is essentially it was created as a script writing software, which often script writing is like film script screenplays, which often that is a collaborative process, and so is created to be a collaborative script writing software, and it fills that functionality fairly well. And you don't have to write screenplays with it either. You can write all kinds of different things with it, and it's relatively effective. So and I think it's free. At least, I think at some point you can pay for more features or something, but so it's worth checking out. But yeah, Google Docs, and even, things like Microsoft Word now are also pretty easily shareable and, easy to collaborate on via cloud software and that kind of a thing. So there's a lot out there that you can collaborate with, but yeah, Google Docs, Microsoft Word are still the easiest and simplest ways to do that, in my experience.
Yeah, Word is starting to get to where you can do that simultaneous editing now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have Office 365 and you use the online version, it's getting closer to Google Docs level of functionality.
Yeah, it's definitely not there, but it's getting there.
Well, it has to move that way. I mean, if you think about Word being originally an Office for actual physical Office, you were losing the concept of physical office at now a vastly accelerated pace. And so I would anticipate Word moving faster in that direction over the next little bit, just because nobody is actually physically in the same space anymore. They really need to be able to collaborate in real time on documents. So I would expect that functionality to improve.
Yeah. It's gotten significantly better over the last about 5 years. But again, Google Docs is definitely the best with collaboration. Microsoft Word is great because it's been the industry standard for a Word software, writing software since forever, which is both good and challenging.
Yeah, since they took over that slot from WordPerfect a couple decades ago.
Yeah.
Doesn't is it George R. R. Martin? He doesn't even use WordPerfect. He uses WordStar on like a 1987 computer that can't access the internet. Like, it's kind of George R. R. Martin's process is very interesting because he writes with this ancient software on an ancient computer, and that's just how he's worked since forever, I guess. So that's what he still does. And I mean, clearly it's working for him enough that he's still doing it, as far as we know.
Well, it's like what we were saying. You find the methods and tools that work for you, and until you have a reason not to, you stick with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And some people just really don't like learning new things. Not in general, but just like when it comes to their process, they have what works for them. And if it works, if it ain't broke, it's pretty true here. So
I think it goes back to Chris's sentiment of what helps you tell the story.
Yeah.
So when it gets to actually writing your novel by yourself, what is the software that you like to use? This is just drafting the novel and not worrying about collaboration.
Oh, it depends on the size for me.
Sorry, say that again, John.
So when you're actually drafting, getting into the writing process, and you're using a software, not your fancy fountain pen, what's the software that you find works best for you?
I'm a Scrivener guy for that. But I have done it in Word as well. And really, honestly, I find myself going back and forth about half the time these days.
Yeah, I think for me, it depends on the size. If I'm just doing a short story, there's no reason to go with the additional overhead and organizational capabilities of Scrivener. I'll just go straight into Word for short stories. But if I'm really needing to organize something and do a scene-by-scene breakdown, things like that, Scrivener is also my go-to tool for that. So it really does vary. If it's something like a little tiny haiku, I've got this little text editor that doesn't do any formatting or anything like that. And I've just got this list of several different poems in there. And so I even break it down farther to where, yeah, I don't care about formatting. I don't care about fonts. Just put the raw text in there, and that's a place to keep it.
Yeah, for me, it's always Scrivener for anything, including short stories. And that's just because for me, I've learned to utilize enough of the features in Scrivener and kind of know my way around it that I can make a short story work for me really well in Scrivener. But like I said, it's, that's a steep learning curve, but for me it works. So I use Scrivener although I will say, maybe we're going to talk about this later. So stop me if I'm stepping on any toes here. But it also kind of depends on what you're using to write. Like, are you using a PC? Are you using a Mac? Are you using a tablet or a phone? Because all kinds of different, any Microsoft Word, Scrivener, every software works differently on different devices, and some aren't available on some devices. So that's something else to keep in mind. But because for me, I write on a desktop at home, but then I write on a tablet when I'm traveling and when I'm out. And I found, and for me, Scrivener still fills that function for both the at home and abroad. But it's definitely all the features that I use at home are not available on the tablet. So I have to be aware of that when I'm traveling. I can't access some of the things that I really like to use when I'm writing from home sometimes. So I have to be aware of that and work accordingly. So,
Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to say that a number of writers that I know write vocally. They don't, and we haven't really addressed that. I talked about it a little bit last night in the panel on grammar. One of your options is to record it all and send it to somebody and have them do it. There are lots of voice transcription software programs. I quote Orson Scott Card. They are so amazing and so terrible. They will get even. I mean, I have written an entire short story in the car, driving on the freeway, 2 lines at a time into Google Docs, because Google voice transcription is pretty good, but it's not as good as the voice to text transcription on my phone. So then I send myself big long text, but then it doesn't know how to punctuate dialogue. So, then you're importing and editing and whatever. So those will get better. Obviously, those will get better as well. A lot of people like Dragon. I've had a love-hate relationship with Dragon. We're on the hate side at the moment. We're not simpatico, but there's a lot of those as well. And there are going to be infinitely more. The chat exploded with 500 different versions of open source, different kinds of things, stuff you can use on Linux, stuff that works on Microsoft. A minute ago about, do you use Markdown when you write? If you do that, Ulysses is the best for that. It's much better than Scrivener for supporting Markdown language if you're doing italics and bold and, all of those kinds of things. And anymore, what constitutes a book? If you're producing if you're producing an interactive book, which more and more with audio, with text, little movie snippets, all kinds of stuff that embedded in the book. Apple's software for that is Apple iBook is just, it's really the best way to go with that. And whatever it is you're going to do, and John's been really good about saying this, what is it you are doing? Like, what is your project? And that's going to dictate to a large degree kind of what is the system that you're going to use, whether it's going to be a whiteboard or whether you're going to build a SQL database that you can just, call to and it brings all your character things, or I don't know, whatever you're going to do. There are not only more options now than there ever have been, that they're more complicated than they ever have been and more fun to use, frankly. There are game systems, sort of gamified writing software that you type in and it counts your words, and there's word targets and whatever. Scrivener will do some of that as well. I mean, my gosh, I don't know how to. This might be the last of these panels you can ever do, just because of the vast complexity of all the different things that are out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are tools that if you don't keep typing, it starts deleting words for you. So that's a major incentive.
Oh, yeah.
One really quick thing about...
Oh, it's terrifying for me, but sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, one quick thing about the dictation thing is a friend of mine has tuned his dictation to where he can insert all of his punctuation by teaching the software which words belong to a symbol instead of an actual word. But there's a side effect to that where he started speaking with punctuation in his normal conversations. And so it gets a little bit weird.
That's funny.
That's hilarious. That is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole plethora of writing apps that are clear out the background, be distraction free. You can only use that software right there. Again, there's a million tools out there. What's going to get you to the story the fastest? What's going to get that through you? When you're getting to the editing stage, I'm guessing, Christopher, this will still be Scrivener. So you've written your first draft of your novel and you're getting through. So do you use that same software or do you like to switch over?
Yeah, when I'm doing later drafts, and part of that is what I mentioned earlier. I compile a lot of metadata when I'm writing, or usually between. I don't do a lot of that during the first draft. I usually punch through a first draft with as much momentum as I can, and then in between first and second draft, I start compiling all this metadata and looking at each scene and what each scene is doing or trying to do or not doing at all, and then revise from there once I have all that data and kind of understand what is and isn't working. And that's all in Scrivener. Yeah. Again, depending on how early I have to work with an editor, like if I have a deadline coming up real soon, I'll maybe just do a real quick pass on my first draft without doing any of that complicated metadata stuff and just boot it to the editor in Word as soon as I can or have to because of deadlines or whatever. And that's fine. That works well. But when I kind of have full reign over my process, I revise in Scrivener because it's best for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a good example of how that actually works really well, because on my second novel, Crystal Queen, I ended up having one case where I had the beginning of a relationship at the first part of the story and the end of that relationship at the end of the story, but I was missing the intermediate parts of this secondary plot. So I wrote the whole thing out as a series of scenes like I would write a short story. And then I was able to just drop this scene goes here, this scene goes here, this scene goes here. And it was able to help me organize all of that. And that's one of the things that Scrivener is really good at, is that organizational structural level.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about process. I tend to write linearly, like start at the beginning. Like I say, I don't plot, so I really need to just, do that. But for a lot of people who have, note cards or whatever, Scrivener has sort of duplicated that with their note card feature, that you can have note cards and you just pull them out and move them around. I mean, if you try to do what you were describing there in Google Docs or in Word, it would fry your brain trying to figure out where you're sticking all these things, just because it's not, even the outline function on the left, it's not as good. So some of it is going to be process driven as well. I always edit in Word, because when I'm done with the whole editing thing and I get finally to the end and all the comments are gone and everything is missing, the next step is I'm formatting for publication. And Al, I guess your next question is going to be, so when you're actually submitting it for publication, or if you're self-publishing, putting it in there, I'm always in Word there. So by the end of the editing stage, I have always ported over from Scrivener to Word, or even from Google Docs to Word. Because that's where I'm going to finish my process.
That's good. Well, we're down to about the last 10 minutes. So if we have any questions from the audience, this is your chance. Although we've had a million questions and a million answers, which is great. I love how active everybody is. But if there's any other questions that you guys want to ask the panel, this is your time to type it now. No need to pass over the microphone. So, that's the other helpful thing.
So we already have a few questions here. Looks like there are three kind of related to Scrivener. Has Scrivener improved for the Windows non-Mac environment? Are there any other options for Windows, given Ulysses is Mac only and LNL has pretty much abandoned Windows development of Scrivener? And then somebody else says that they had to stop using Scrivener because they couldn't use it across multiple different computers and asked for cloud software world-building software in the cloud.
Yeah, I think just using notes is a way that a friend of mine has been able to handle a lot of that world building, just to be able to get a collection of documents that all belong together. And so that's one of the ways that she has been handling that, just for that preliminary pre-writing data organization of what you're going to be writing about. You just need to make sure it's going to be in a format that's easy for you to access when you get to the writing part, because like we said before, that's the important part, is once you get to the writing, to make that as smooth and as easy and as quick to get to as possible.
Just to expand on the whole, a shout out to two different softwares there. One is Evernote, which I don't use so much anymore. I've kind of consolidated my process and have mostly eliminated Evernote, but it is very helpful and a really fantastic note-taking software for exactly what John is talking about. The other is something rather new. It's called Roam Research. It is a really interesting note-taking software that they call a second brain. And I won't get into it. I won't explain a lot here because there's a lot to explain and a lot to talk about. But for the research part, it can be really interesting. And I've found a lot of different uses for Roam Research. So that's one to check out as well.
Christian?
Yeah, I was going to mention Evernote. I know people who use Evernote kind of as a database system. It's very powerful in terms of the hyperlinks and the tags that you can put on the notes. I use Evernote, but I've never used it as a writing tool. But I do use Evernote as a commonplace book. And if that's not a term you're familiar with, the commonplace book it used to be the little book that you would carry around and you would just jot notes in all the time. I do use Evernote still. I maintain whenever I meet someone and they have a name that you absolutely have to put in a book. Evernote is the place that all those names go. And when I wake up in the morning and there's a first line of a story, like one morning it was, and all of a sudden there's an elephant in my car. I knew that line had to go at the beginning of a story, and so I picked up my phone, told Evernote to stick that in the folder of ideas to use, and so I do use it as a kind of a catch-all for generating story ideas. If I ever need one, I've got 2,000 in my Evernote in a file, and they're all tagged, and I just grab whatever. So Evernote can work really well for that. I don't want to open up a Word file for that. I don't want to have to go to Scrivener and put that someplace. So that's sort of like a story seed thing. And there are a lot of programs like Evernote that do that kind of thing as well. And that's sort of part of the process, but not really a part that we've discussed much.
As a side note, what I use mostly Word. But I use it a lot on my phone, and you can make a little icon for each of your files, and you can put it on your home screen. And so I use OneDrive, the cloud service through Microsoft, a ton. And so I will be out at the grocery store. There's a little bit of a long line, and so I'll pull up my novel and be like, I'm working on my novel. I'm standing in the grocery store and get like 3 minutes in, and then come back, open up my computer, and boom, it's already up on the cloud. So looking at the cloud surfaces, Google Docs also allow you to do that. But it's really great. I've got basically like a file system on my home page of my phone. I've got a file system in here that's like, this is the draft of this. So again, it's about what tool works for you. Let's try one more question, unless you guys had another thought on that.
Okay. Jennifer Hart asks, any writer software that is not worth the money or learning curve?
Final Draft, frankly, unless you are unless script writing, screenwriting is just what you are going to do and want to do. Final Draft is a fantastic software, and it's the industry standard for screenwriting, but it's super expensive. It's very expensive, and man, unless you're really committed to that industry, there are other options out there. Even for like Scrivener can handle screenwriting okay. Writer Duet I mentioned. There are other screenwriting softwares out there that you can dabble in until you. If you're in Hollywood, if you're a screenwriter in Hollywood, you need Final Draft because, like I said, it's the industry standard. But it's so expensive. Don't just jump into it.
Yeah, you can actually go quite a ways with the templates in a lot of the other software packages to handle things just like that.
Yep.
True. I've never actually paid for a software that I didn't think was worth the money. We haven't talked a lot about Ulysses. Ulysses, I think, is $50 a year, but it's beautiful. I mean, Ulysses is a beautiful system for writing. It's Mac only, so you're definitely you're locking yourself out of the PC market there. But for a lot of people who have access to both, or I got to say, I mean, I think Ulysses is really good. It's very much like Scrivener in terms of its organizational style. It lacks some of the features that Scrivener has, but it simplifies other ones where Scrivener is a little bit clunky. It does allow you to use Markdown language, so has full support for that. And some people were talking in the chat about that was something they were interested in. So there's a lot of usefulness in that software as well. That I think is again, it comes down to getting comfortable with something and using that as a tool for putting your words on the page and making the story happen. But I mean, I've owned Ulysses for about a month since I knew I was going to be on a panel talking about Ulysses, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's already paid me $50 worth of productivity. So. Most of these packages of software, I mean, they may sound really expensive up front, but I mean, when you're thinking about the kinds of investments that you make in writing conferences and books and style manuals and all of the other things that we do, if you're going to use it, it's going to pay for itself. But no software will pay for itself if you let it sit on your hard drive and don't do anything.
Yeah, there's also the cost of using some of that free software that is a weight around your ankle, dragging you down and slowing you. And so you have to decide where you're going to invest that.
Last question. Do you guys want to do a quick shameless plug for your next panel?
Well, I don't have a next panel. This is my actual last one, so I'm going to be able to enjoy the next day and a half. One quick thing. If somebody wants to sign up to my newsletter, they can find me at johnmolson.blogspot.com. So there you go.
Yeah, I actually don't have any other panels coming up. This is it for me. I had 2 yesterday and 1 today, and so I could just get to hang out and enjoy the con. But you can find me online. My books are available on Amazon. Most bookstores sell my books too. ChristopherHusberg.com is my website. So yeah, come check me out.
Chris?
I've got 2 more panels tomorrow, one at 3 and one at 5. The 3 o'clock is sometimes the future isn't all that great, but it's not a dystopia either, which I'm really looking forward to because that's some of the stuff I teach in college. And then I also have one at 5 on the good, the bad, and the ugly of self-publishing. No spoilers, but I do have a definite opinion about which one of those 3 is true. You can get me at I'm an email guy, so you can get me at chris@iamchrisjones.com. Super complicated email address, but I do have to say thanks to Elle for the panel, and thanks for the interaction in the chat. Absolutely great stuff, and I really loved how the panel has worked and how the whole system, the way the whole conference has worked. It's all of these panels are amazing, and being able to jump from one to another, and I was skeptical that the online would work well, but I really think it has, and I want to compliment the organizers and the moderators, especially for these panels, on the tremendous job that they do, because they're all doing it for the first time, and you can't tell. I mean, they're terrific. I'm so impressed.
It's been very well organized. I've only got 8 more to go. 8 more panels. So I've already done 3. This is my 3rd one. So I'll be back at 3 p.m. for So Let It Be Written, Contract Law and Society.